If you're trying to lower your Mark 7, you should probably watch this video.
Because I'm here in my garage and I'm about to break it down for you. What is up, fellas? It's your boy,
Skidabittus.
and today we're gonna be talking about suspension. Mainly, I wanna talk about the differences between springs and coilovers because I've had experience with both of those for quite a while on my car. And to be honest, I would love to talk about bags too, but we're broke boys, so we don't have any cars on bags. But I see all the time people asking on Facebook, should I get lowering springs? Should I get coilovers? What are the pros and cons? What is ride height like? And all those things, so I figured I can share my experience with you guys. Now let's kind of start off with cost. Lowering springs are substantially cheaper than a good set of coilovers. I think for my H&R springs that I had before, I picked them up on ECS Tuning on sale for like $260 or $270. And I did that initially because when I first started building this car and I just wanted to get it lowered, I was on a pretty tight budget and couldn't afford a good set of coilovers. The coilovers that I have right now are ORT coilovers, and they're pretty high end, but they're gonna run you about $1,400 new. You can get cheaper coils like Solo Works, for example, and I have tons of friends running Solo Works, and I think they're about $600, but they are missing a couple of features like adjustable dampening, which these coilovers do have and allows you to set the stiffness of the coilover. The point is, you can get cheaper coilovers and you can even get like $300 coilovers, but don't expect them to be like super duper good compared to some of the high-end stuff. And you can't expect as much adjustability like independent dampening, rebound control, and some of those things. And keep in mind too, coilovers can get into the thousands of dollars range. Like a good set of KWs or a good set of Fortunatos is thousands of dollars compared to a couple $100 for a set of lowering springs. But you get what you pay for. Both are pretty good, but it kind of depends on what your budget is. You can buy springs and coilovers used and get them quite a bit cheaper. I see regularly on Facebook lowering springs going for like 100 to 150, $200, and coilovers as well, but they typically are still around like that $700, $800 price point. I actually managed to snag these ones on my car for like $400 and a case of Coors Light, but I wouldn't really recommend buying coilovers used because in my experience, it didn't work out too well. And if you guys want to know more about that, I'll get into it in another video, so subscribe. But in my opinion, springs are probably fine to buy used. Let's talk about comfort. When you install a set of springs on a pretty new set of stock struts and shocks, it's really not that bad. However, over time, the springs will start to wear out your suspension, especially the hydraulics and stuff in the shocks, sooner than later. And over time, it will lead to a more bumpy ride, especially like when you're going over bumps, it'll just kind of be very bouncy and stuff. Though at first it was totally fine. I think the H&R springs that I had rode slightly worse than stock, but it was still very bearable and good as a daily. Coilovers, on the other hand, I gotta say, they ride really, really good, especially over bumps and stuff. When I'm adjusting the dampening and I'm able to just set it on a really soft setting, it does feel like almost factory. And it still handles better than the springs did. And speaking of handling, the coilovers are not even close into comparison of how the springs handled. The springs did improve the car quite a bit and did reduce the body roll side to side. However, it was not nearly as drastic as doing the sway bar, for example. Granted, I did do the sway bar after I did the springs, so that probably doesn't help the frame of reference here. But after I did switch from springs to coilovers, dude, it is night and day. Like, especially with having the stiffness turned all the way up, when I went into the mountains, like the car just feels so much more planted and so much more connected around turns. It really changed the way that the car drove. And I'm not just saying that, like it literally is night and day. Before I had the coilovers, I could not really keep up with people in the mountains, but now I feel a lot more confident going through turns without feeling like the rear end's about to slide out, and it's way better. You get the extra driver mod just from the confidence of being able to go into turns. It is worth mentioning too, when you are putting the coilovers on the stiffest setting, front and rear, the car does not ride nearly as comfortable as it does on the softest setting. So at that point, it definitely rides worse than the H&R springs, but it handles way better. And on the contrary, when you have them on the softest setting, it still handles better than the H&R springs, but it drives more like OEM, if that makes sense. Also kind of related to the performance side is launching and wheel spin. The H&R springs that I had, they're really soft. They aren't super stiff, which is good for comfortability and all that. But when you're trying to do racing and launching and stuff, there's just way too much squatting and just movement, and it's not ideal. With the coilovers being able to adjust the stiffness and everything, it makes it way more easy to just be able to keep the car level when you launch, and that helps a lot with traction. As far as ride height and adjustability goes, different types of springs are going to lower your car a different amount. The H&R springs I had did not lower it too much, much, but it definitely was enough to at least get rid of most of the wheel gap. And I know there are some other springs that might go slightly lower. I can't remember which ones off the top of my head, but a little bit of research will go a long way. There are also adjustable springs and stuff too, but just because a lot of the GLIs have DCC or dynamic chassis controls, the suspension is a little bit different. And if you go too low, it'll actually throw the sensors that control how much dampening to apply on each side, it'll throw them out of whack. And that's the reason these cars can only be lowered so much on springs before you run into issues with the factory DCC. Essentially, there's two levers on each side of the car that go up and down, and depending on the percentage of travel on each side, it adjusts the stiffness of the suspension on each side to kind of try and keep it as planted as possible. I might have butchered that a little bit, but that's the general understanding of it. Now, of course, with coilovers, you do typically have adjustability in terms of ride height. And in my case, I was able to pretty much lower mine down almost all the way. And you can see that's roughly what my wheel gap is. And this is it in the rear. And honestly, the rear is not even close to maxed out because I just can't fit the tires. The front still has a little bit more room, but I just want to try to avoid rubbing. So this is kind of where it's at. But there is another component to that. It's really hard for me to show this because I don't have my wheel off, but essentially around each coilover and shock, we have a little thing called a DCC canceler. Now, after you remove your factory DCC suspension, you will essentially have a ton of errors on your car and it doesn't know what to do. It just basically freaks out. So the canceler will essentially cancel out the signal from those levers in the percentage reading and just kind of be like, oh, the car is fine. Don't worry about it. So if you don't have those, you'll get a ton of extra errors. But in my case, because my car is so low and it's not even dumped or anything, the sensors are actually out of range and it's lower than the factory tolerances of those arms and levers, so there is no signal for the canceler to cancel out. And while they do eliminate most of my issues, I still get a suspension fault, which is a little triangle on the dash, after driving for about a minute or two. And that's a little bit annoying, but it's not like I'm getting all the other errors that I would have had if I had not had those DCC cancelers. Now, I do have a friend that was able to completely delete his DCC system from his car, and so we are going to look into trying to do that soon, and if so, I will make another video on that. But for right now, this is just kind of the situation with being on coilovers that are not DCC compliant, like a nice set of the H&R ones, for example, which by the way, get expensive. In fairness though, if I did want to raise my car a little bit, I could probably get away with the DCC cancelers working properly. It's just my decision to be as low as I am. Another big thing is installation. Installation between springs and coilovers is also quite different, but it's also not different at the same time. Like I said, the first video I ever made on this channel was installing lowering springs, and it was a trash video. But there are lots of other good videos out there that show you how to work on the suspension of these cars. Essentially for the springs, you have to take out, the front struts, and you're gonna have to take the top hat off, pull the spring out, use a spring compressor, and then swap in your new springs, put the top hat back on, and the whole strut assembly back on the car. With coilovers, the front's a bit easier because once you take out the strut, you slide in the new strut, and because they are typically a lot shorter than factory, putting it back together is a piece of cake. In the rear, you have to disconnect all the components from the lower control arm, which is basically 3 bolts, and then the spring will just slide out and you can put in your new spring. With coilovers, you do the same thing, but you also have to remove the 2 bolts holding in the shock in the rear and then replace that as well. And you have to take out the fender liner on the passenger side, as well as the charcoal canister, and kind of disconnect all that stuff. So it is a little bit more work for the coilovers, but it's not that bad. The part that really took me the longest with coilovers though was the fine tuning. Obviously with coilovers, you get a lot more adjustability in terms of, setting your ride height, setting your suspension softness at first, and kind of making sure everything's good. And that part does take a long time, especially because my driveway and my garage are not level. It's really hard to kind of corner balance it. And so I ended up just taking it to a shop and having them do it on a level ground because it's not okay to do it on slanted earth, I guess. I know this was a lot of information, but to be honest, both have a lot of pros and cons on these cars. Like I said, when I started out modifying this car, I did springs because it was cheaper, but over time, I kind of realized, we were building this car so much to the way it is right now that these springs were honestly just kind of a bottleneck in terms of what I wanted the car to be. I wanted it to handle better, and without upgrading to something like coilovers, that just was not gonna happen. Especially in the future, if we want to do more racing, more drag racing, more mountain driving, and all all those things, we need to be able to put down the power and make the car handle as good as possible. There's nothing wrong with upgrading later, but if I could go back in time, I probably would have saved my money and just gone ahead and done coilovers from the beginning. But you live and you learn. Anyways, let me know what you guys think down below, and if you guys found this helpful, make sure you subscribe because we're doing a whole video series just kind of talking about random shit on the car, and I hope that it can be useful to the people that are getting into modifying these cars. As always, if you don't subscribe, you won't get any lemonade, you won't get any cookies, so sucks to suck. Peace out.